Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So I saw this article and I love this article. You heard me ask before, where is the anti-war left? Where for Arthur is the anti-war left? Now the funny part is, Rand Paul was the one that asked this question. Rand Paul, Republican Rand Paul. In the well of Congress, he did a sit-in until they forced Congress to have a vote on the military authorization. Essentially forced Congress to take a stand on whether or not the president is a king, whether the president can go into one country after the next without Congress's approval, whether the president can declare war by default. Is the president of the United States bound by laws or not? That's a yes or no question. Meaning, is there a constitution? Is there some document that constrains the powers of the presidency? We're a country by laws. What that means is that we ourselves as a citizenry of this country has, almost by de facto, agreed to a document, the Constitution. And in agreeing to that document, we agree that there are certain powers that are vested in what we call the government, a governing apparatus of our society. The president is the head of that society at that point, or at the very least, the manager. He's the most notable manager of that society. Congress and everything else is, but all of these things ultimately are supposed to be the will of the people. It's supposed to be the apparatus that institutes policy that represents the interests of the public. That's not what we have now. We have an oligarchy. I'd make the argument that you can't have a capitalistic society and a democracy running side by side. The capital of that society would accrue in one part, to the top. As it accrues to the top, that would gain a certain amount of political clout. That political clout is going to pull the country, that quote-unquote democracy, in a particular direction. If the capital and the elites of that society is pulling the society in a direction, that direction is probably not going to be in the best interest of the people who are in that society. The problem is structural. Take this to another degree where that country develops this kind of war policy. This joining between government and private military interests. So there's a vested interest in the government murdering people abroad. It creates jobs. Somebody has to make that bullet. Somebody has to make that airplane. Somebody has to make that gun. Somebody has to make the transportation to get those weapons from point A to point B. We spend $1 trillion. Spend $1 trillion murdering people abroad. I've asked the question again, where is the anti-war left? During the 60s, during the Vietnam War, there was a draft. That draft was somewhat random. The people during that time bitched and moaned, and Nixon thought those people were coming to get him. You had a population of kids that were pissed and vehemently against that war. So much so that at some point they killed the draft. Now here's the catch. In killing the draft, you still had a volunteer military. But 1% of the population. About 1% of the United States population is in the military. This gives the president a private military. The military and what takes place doesn't affect the wider society. Because it doesn't affect the wider society, it allows the president to use those people to whatever ends the president wants to use those people. So yes, we can have him gallivanting around the globe murdering people. The rest of the population, for the most part, eats their Cheerios, pets their kids on the head, go about their day. They watch their movies, they play their Xbox, and they give no mind to what's taking place abroad. It doesn't matter that the president is murdering people. It doesn't matter that he's having flying killer robots murder civilians. It doesn't matter that he's dragging people and putting people in cages and black sites, never to be seen from again. It doesn't matter. It doesn't affect us. It doesn't matter. Where's the anti-war left? And is the left so shallow that ultimately the things that are taking place abroad in other countries don't matter to it because it's not happening to them? I had the amazing experience of hearing one supposed lefty after the next make this argument as to why Obama had to murder civilians abroad. Many of those strikes, 90% of those things hit civilians. A lot of times they had no idea who they were hitting. They were doing signature strikes. This guy's telephone. We had a signal from this guy's telephone. Anybody who's in that area that's 16 years or older is fair game and is a terrorist. Are they a terrorist for real? Who the fuck knows? They were in an area and they were adults. This is our policy. This is our military. It's vulgar. Spending $1 trillion. This document from Forbes magazine is making the point American taxpayers must be told the real cost of war. I love this document. I love it. I'm going to read part of this. This is by Bonnie Kristen. Congress has spent much of the last decade not passing budgets and the federal spending bills, the omnibuses and the stopgaps, the sequesters and extensions, which do pass are typically Byzantine monstrosities, unintelligible to most of the constituents their creators ostensibly serve. Congress has spent recent years not passing declarations of war, and the multitude of military interventions in which the United States is entangled anyway is a confusing mess of conflicting and concealed information which is a waste, is ignored, and mission is ever creeping. The mission is ever creeping because the mission is ridiculous. There is no such thing as a war on terror. What does that even mean? This is kind of one of those things of political speak. When somebody asks me, what am I? Capitalist, socialist? I'm none of those things. What works? I don't have an ideology in the standpoint of I'm beholden to X. What works? This is more of a technical question to me. Is murdering a bunch of people abroad going to create peace in the world? Is it possible to spend $250 billion that you're using killing people rebuilding those areas? I would almost wager that you would get more peace by putting out bread and food in a safe area than you would by murdering all these people. That's my argument. After World War II, we had the Marshall Plan. We rebuilt those countries that we destroyed. Germany made it out okay. Japan made it out okay. They turned into absolutely functioning democracies and friends of ours. What would have happened if we didn't do that? What would have been the case if we did not rebuild those countries? If we left those countries to be just demolished and hellholes? What have they devolved into? Why do we believe that the Middle East is different? Why do we believe they're different? They're people. They're human beings. I would guarantee you would get farther trying to rebuild than trying to destroy. Let's keep going. With such a ramshackle fiscal and foreign policy alike, Americans might be forgiven for uncertain whether and where our government is at war, how long it has been there, and how much the whole thing will cost us. We can't get infrastructure spending. We can't get health care. We can't get free college. We can't do anything for the population itself. For all of the cash that we make in this country, for all of the millions and billionaires that we have in this country, we can't do anything at home. We do have $1 trillion to murder people abroad, but that's for murdering people abroad. I just find this to be amazing. The American public can look at a military budget that's $1 trillion and then hear these guys bitch and moan about education and healthcare. I find that to be amazing, that's all. Let's keep going. And that's a shame because without such information, we're ill-equipped to select our representatives or demand their accountability and good policy making once in office. Washington's irresponsibility is self-perpetuating, and it occurs on such a grand scale that even the canniest observer is liable to miss gross impudence, imprudence, and corruption. It is that context that makes it so valuable. A little notice clause in this year's Defense Authorization Bill requiring Defense Secretary and Internal Revenue Service Commissioner to put online the full cost, including relevant legacy costs to each American taxpayer of each of the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. This means that the Defense Department and the IRS will be required to calculate how much each and every one of us has spent on the last decade and a half of military interventions in all 3 of these countries. Understand that we're in more countries. They're just talking about these 3. Also, let's note that they noted Syria. They noted Syria. The United States has no justification to be in Syria at all. You can make an argument about Iraq. You can make an argument about Afghanistan. Yes, we invaded a country that killed 1 million people, but ultimately there was some kind of defense authorization to do so. It was immensely immoral, but legality has nothing to do with morality. How do we get into Syria? How do we get into Yemen? How do we get into Somalia? How do we get into Libya? How do we get into all of these places without Congress having a say-so in this? How? How does that take place? At what point did the president become a king? And understand, this is not being done for free. The soldiers, the military, the equipment, that's not being done for free. We've created a system that monetizes war and conflict. Killing them abroad creates a job here in America. Think of how immoral that is. Think about how vile and vulgar that is. This guy works at a weapons company. That weapons company creates weapons that murders people abroad. The fact that he's murdering people abroad allows this guy to keep his job. It's gross. It's sure to be a hefty bill. Already, we've dropped an estimated $5 trillion with a T on Iraq and Afghanistan alone. And accounting those relevant legacy costs, like long-term health care commitments to U.S. veterans and interest in the debt incurred in these wars. The total is projected to be $12 trillion by 2053. With a current account of 120 million taxpayers, that comes out to be a cool $100,000 a head. In addition to paying your medical bills, in addition to paying your college bills, in addition to paying your bills that just in everyday life, you now have $100 trillion on your head that you need to pay for the American wars abroad. Is that going to be cash or a check? And that's if we're done in Iraq and Afghanistan by the end of 2017. And that's not including expenditures in Syria, let alone Libya, Pakistan, Somalia, and Yemen. Two huge qualifiers suggest that $100,000 a pop is too cautious an estimate. That means that's a lowball number. That's a lowball number. $5 trillion. Now, I understand that you may not necessarily care that we have troops in all of these countries killing people abroad. I understand you may not care that we have 70% of the world's of countries with us and special forces involved in 70% of the world's countries. Literally. I get it. We don't care about the murdering people abroad. Don't care. To us, they're not real. We see a number on the screen, 1 million people, and wow, it's hard to quantify what that number is. It's hard to quantify the suffering and the death of all the people that we've murdered, killed, maimed, injured. But what about the costs? What about being $21 trillion in debt? That number has just hit $20 trillion. And having nothing to show for it. Nothing at all to show for it. You should have high-speed rail in every city. You should have healthcare for each and every American. You should have college for each and every American. If you want to go to college, have at it. You can go to college. You're a human being. As a society, we acknowledge your value, so we make sure that these things are available to you. Not so much. Not so much. We're willing to pay to put people in cages in this country. We're willing to pay to have people rendition. We're willing to pay like $20 trillion and $1 trillion a year to murder people abroad. But we don't want to use that money in any way to rebuild either there or here at home. What does that say about your political apparatus? Do you believe that your political apparatus is working in your best interest if it's willing to do that? Both parties, by the way. Both. What, Donald Trump asked for 60, 70 billion. They gave him 80 billion. I put the Forbes article at the bottom. Damn it, I'm supposed to be out of here by now. I'm sitting here looking at articles. There needs to be an anti-war left. There needs to be an anti-war left. Left and right. If there's nothing else that we can agree on, at the very least, stop spending our money murdering people abroad. That should be a fundamental basis that we can agree on, left or right. If you're a libertarian, yes, join with me on this one. Join with me. We can have the fights internally in regards to government. I would agree with you on half of the stuff that you're talking about. Yes, legalize pot. Yes, leave me to my devices under normal circumstances. Yes, I don't want the government bugging the shit out of me. What we break agreement on is this idea of what freedom is. What freedom is. As a human being, there are going to be certain things that you need. You're not an entity unto yourself. You were never an entity unto yourself. Just from the basics of it, there's always going to be this idea of work. In order to persist yourself, there's a certain amount of work that's required. The question becomes, how do you do that labor? How do you get that labor done? There's no such thing as freedom without that labor being done. If you don't have the ability of health, if you don't have the ability of clean air, food, shelter, water, this kind of sense of fulfillment, then you will never be free. The libertarian idea of freedom is somewhat cartoonish. I'm saying create a society where those things are met, where you have your food, you have your shelter, you have your clothing, all of those things are met. You get up in the morning, you do what you want to do, not because you have to do it, not because you're compelled to in this vulgar way of not having your needs met, but because society recognizes your value. Part of that is this idea of healthcare. Part of that is this idea of not using our resources to murder people abroad. Now, I'd argue that what you do abroad is also going to come home to you, meaning that military equipment that you're using abroad is also going to be used to oppress you. If you believe that it's okay to respond to the world and force in this way, do you believe that your government is going to respond to you somehow differently? There's a reason you have 25% of the world's population in cages at home. Our idea of life is trivial. We trivialize life. We believe that profits are more important than the individual and a human being. In that case, it is okay for a weapons company, all of these companies that deal with death and murder and killing. Yes, we're going to give them huge amounts of money and huge amounts of cash. If there is nothing else that we can agree on, you can disagree with me on everything that I say, but at the very least, I know the libertarians believe and agree with that part. Stop spending our money, our blood and treasure murdering people abroad. How much money is enough? How much? How much do you want to spend abroad? And when you look at that price tag, that $5 trillion, ask the second question. What could you have done with that money at home? What could you have done with that money if you spent it at home? God, no, I'd imagine like those in secret projects. Yeah, black budget. That's why I always say $1 trillion. Like, they may say 800 billion and this and that. There are black budget projects. There are projects that are off the meter that most people don't know about. That's the president's discretion. I would not be shocked in any way if the United States was trying to weaponize space. I would not be shocked in any way if the United States was doing secret projects using some kind of wild and bizarre technologies. Wouldn't shock me in the least. They lost $3.2 trillion just before 9/11. T, with a T. Rumsfeld comes out a few days before 9/11. We don't know what $3.2 trillion went. No clue. The military spends money like a drunken sailor. Nobody says squat about it. Nobody says squat. Hey, what about healthcare? Hey, you're going too far. You're going too far. You're going too far with that. You're going too far with that. A. Rain, I also believe natural resources of the country should be publicly owned, not for private profit. I agree. I agree. Companies should not have the ability to steal public resources. That is common heritage. And when I say common heritage, each and every resource that's being exploited by some kind of private corporation should be a kickback to the American public. You should not be able to steal public lands. A politician gets in office and sells off public property. They should not be able to do that. They should not be able to do that. That land should be common heritage. If you want to use the land for oil production, fine. You can lease it. You're paying some kind of stipend to the American public, however. In the same way the Sarah Palin did in Alaska, where those people were getting a kickback for the oil, we should also get a kickback for the oil. If you're looking for a way to justify this kind of universal basic income, there you go. Common heritage. The land and the utility and the resources of this country belong to the people of this country. If you want to use those resources, you're going to pay back a certain amount of money to use those resources. Call it a wealth tax. Call call it a universal basic income. I don't care what you call it. It should go back to the American public. I completely and wholeheartedly agree. Garnome, to be frank, I think we have infrastructure on the moon. It might be manned, but I doubt it. It's possible, yeah. I'm not against it. I'm not opposed to it. And it's probably true. I wouldn't be shocked. But look, I'm one of those people who reads a lot of UFO literature. Or at least I used to. And so you get into this thing of what is the capacity of the United States, known versus unknown. If you have billions and billions and billions of dollars, what can you do with those billions of dollars if you just put a bunch of scientists in a room and say, go fucking bananas? Have at it. You don't have to deal with what the public thinks. You don't have to deal with any of this stuff. Go bananas. This is what we know. Go bananas. Figure this shit out. Find ways to deal with it. Find ways to manipulate the technology. No, we're not going to tell the public. Well, figure this shit out. I'm not shocked by that at all. I would imagine all countries have their black budget projects. It's not just the United States. If we had the technology to put people on the moon, would we? Probably, yeah. I wouldn't be shocked by that at all. Wouldn't be shocked by it at all. I wouldn't even be shocked having a parallel space program. Meaning you have NASA, you have this thing as a front of sorts. One of the people in NASA came out saying that NASA was doctoring the photos. Wow, we've gone so far away from the main topic. Fuck it. They were doctoring photos, meaning there were certain things that would come out. They would scrub those things from the picture because they didn't want the public to see certain things. I wouldn't be shocked by it at all. Cameron Miguel, the community should own the resources to survive collectively. We should also cut the military spending by 50%. Just last year we spent 1.6 trillion. We could use that for better purposes. No shit, Sherlock. No shit. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm saying that jokingly. Yes, yes. You should cut the military budget. The military budget at this point is a jobs program. Let's be honest. They are skimming hand and fist over the top. People think that the United States military is the best in the world. It may be the best in the world. It may be the most technological, but understand, some of those people are skimming money off the top. Yes, you have an awesome military. No, you have not been in a large-scale conflict. You've been toppling one country after the next that couldn't necessarily compete with your technological advantage. You've not been in a real conflict. You've not been in a real conflict. If the United States does anything to Syria, if the United States shoots down a Russian plane, I would argue that even there's a chance if the United States attacks Iran, it will be in a large-scale conflict. Maybe with the Soviet Union. I mean, with Russia. And I still believe that any conflict with Russia is a conflict with China. I don't think you're going to have this thing where the United States attack one and the other doesn't get involved. My biggest concern is this kind of thing of spiraling into a World War I scenario where something small happens and it topples and spirals into this kind of major world conflict. The deck chairs are set. The deck chairs are set. If the United States continue to creep in Syria, if the United States in any way shoots down anything that belongs to Russia or Syria, we will be in a larger conflict. So, Ryan, Mideast wars are just creating more terrorists. It's just insanity. That's true. And you have to ask the question, is that the point? Is that the goal? Is the goal to keep the Middle East destabilized for a certain amount of power in that region? So think about the way the public is in this country. You have all of these people who want these different things, and you have the top 1% who's somewhat unified in keeping themselves on that top rank. The destabilization of the people in the country itself, meaning people being in all these different areas. Now, when you poll these people, ultimately these people want the same thing or very similar things. But ultimately these people are divided, often by race, often by these minor trivial pursuits. Think about that on a scale of countries, not necessarily on a scale of just one country. And you can kind of see that logic of keeping those places destabilized allows us to rape those countries' resources and allows us to have this kind of proxy control of the area. It's possible that it's not chaos in the sense of these guys are buffoons, that it's chaos in the sense of, yes, we like this chaos because it allows us to keep a certain amount of control. I don't know which one it is. All right. yeah, alright. I'm going to play some chess. Alright, guys. If you enjoy the content, feel free to share, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the work through Patreon. Thank you.